The paper was folded in thirds. A hospital security guard held it in front of me like it was nothing, like it was a parking ticket, like the name printed on it did not belong to the man who had been sitting beside that woman's bed for 11 straight days. My daughter handed that paper to the nursing staff while I was getting coffee from the machine down the hall. 2 minutes. I was gone 2 minutes. And in those 2 minutes, Renee had arranged to have me legally removed from my wife's room. The guard apologized. He said he was just doing his job. I nodded. I folded my coffee cup into the trash, and I walked out of that hospital with my hands steady and my chest full of something I had no word for yet. I had spent 31 years being the man who stayed. I had paid every bill, made every sacrifice, driven every late-night mile, and held a family together with both hands. And the person I had given the most to had just handed a stranger a legal document to keep me out of the room where my wife was trying to breathe. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. Not about me, about you. If you had given 3 decades of your life to a family, if you had put your own dreams in a drawer and locked it, if you had shown up every single time without being asked, and then one morning you found yourself standing in a hospital hallway holding a paper that said you no longer had the right to be there, what would you do? Would you fight? Would you fold? Would you disappear quietly and let them win? Stay with me, because what I did next changed everything, and I need you to understand how it happened from the very beginning. My name is Reid. I am 58 years old. I grew up in a small house on the east side of a town called Milford, where my father worked 2 jobs and my mother kept the lights on with coupons and careful planning. I learned early that love was not a feeling you waited to receive. It was a thing you showed up and built every single day, whether anyone noticed or not. That lesson followed me into every room I ever walked into. It followed me into my marriage. It followed me into parenthood. And it followed me all the way to that hospital hallway, where I stood holding a styrofoam coffee cup and a paper that told me I no longer belonged. I met Carol in our mid-20s. She was a school teacher then, sharp and warm and full of opinions about everything. We married in the backyard of her parents' home on a September afternoon when the light came through the oak trees in a way I still think about. We had nothing when we started. I was working construction management and she was building her classroom from her own pocket like most teachers do. We had one car between us for the first 4 years. We argued about money sometimes, about priorities, about the way a family should be shaped. But we always came back to each other. We built something real. We had 2 children. Our son Devin, who is now 33 and lives in another state with his wife and 2 kids. And our daughter Renee, who is 31 and lives 20 minutes from the house Carol and I shared for the last 22 years. I want to say something about Renee that might be hard to hear. She was not a bad child. She was loved. She had every advantage we could reasonably give her. But somewhere in her 20s, something shifted in her. She became someone who needed to be the most important person in every room, not in a loud way, in a quiet, calculated way. She positioned herself carefully. She managed information. She decided who was valuable and who was not. And over time, without me fully realizing it, she had positioned herself as the authority on our family. She knew things, she made calls, she handled arrangements. And I, in my habit of trusting the people I loved, had let her move into that space without questioning it. Carol got sick in her early 50s. It started as something the doctors called manageable, a heart condition that required medication, monitoring, and some changes to her lifestyle. We adjusted together. I cut back my hours at work. I cooked more. I drove her to appointments. I sat in waiting rooms reading old magazines and asking doctors questions I had written down the night before. None of that felt like a sacrifice. It felt like what you do when you love someone. It felt like what a husband is for. But as Carol's health became a more central part of our lives, Renee stepped in. She began coming to appointments. At first it was helpful, then it became something else. She started having separate conversations with Carol's doctors. She began making decisions about Carol's care and mentioning them to me afterward as if my opinion had already been considered and found unnecessary. I told myself she was just worried. I told myself she loved her mother. I told myself not to make it into a conflict because Carol was already carrying enough. That was my mistake, not the only one but the one. That cost me the most. The hospitalization happened in the spring. Carol had a significant cardiac event at home. I called 911. I rode in the ambulance holding her hand. I stayed at the hospital for the first 4 days without leaving once. I slept in the chair beside her bed. I ate whatever someone brought me. I watched monitors and learned what numbers mattered. I spoke to every doctor and nurse who came through that door. I was her husband. I was her person. I had always been her person. Renee arrived on the second day. She was professional in the way she moved through the hospital, confident and organized. She brought a folder. She had questions written out. She asked the nurses things I had already asked. I did not mind. I told myself we were on the same side. What I did not know yet was what she had already been doing outside that hospital in the weeks and months before Carol's hospitalization. I did not know about the conversations. I did not know about the documents. I did not know what she had put in motion. On the third day, Devin called me from his home and asked how his mother was doing. He sounded genuinely worried. I told him the truth. I told him it was serious but that the doctors were cautiously hopeful. He said he would try to fly in. He sounded like himself, like the boy I raised who wore his feelings openly and made no apologies for it. I told him to come if he could but not to panic. After I hung up, Renee was watching me from across the room with an expression I could not quite read. She said Devon did not need to fly in yet. She said she had it handled. I asked her what that meant. She said it meant she was there and she would let Devon know if things changed. I felt something tight in my chest, but I did not push it. Carol was awake that day and she squeezed my hand and said she was glad I was there and that she loved me. I held it the way a man holds something he knows is precious. I held it and tried not to think about anything else. On day 7, one of Carol's attending doctors pulled me aside in the hall. He was a quiet man, careful with words. He told me that he wanted to make sure I was aware of a healthcare proxy document that had been filed in Carol's chart. He told me it named Renee as Carol's primary medical decision maker. He showed it to me gently. He watched my face. The document was dated 14 months earlier. Carol's signature was on it. Renee's name was at the top. I stood very still in that hallway. I asked the doctor when this document had been submitted to the hospital. He told me it had been in Carol's file since her last routine cardiology appointment 14 months ago. I thanked him. I went back into Carol's room. Carol was sleeping. I sat in the chair and I looked at her face and I tried to understand what I was feeling. It was not anger yet. It was something quieter and colder. Something that felt like the moment you realize a picture you thought you understood has been painted entirely differently than you believed. I did not confront Renee that day. I needed to understand first. I needed to think carefully. I am not a man who acts from heat. I have always believed that the strongest thing you can do in a crisis is stay calm long enough to see clearly. So I stayed calm. I sat beside my wife. I held her hand when she woke up. I told her I loved her. And I began very quietly to pay closer attention to everything. On day 9, I noticed that Renee had started arriving earlier than me each morning. She was there before visiting hours opened. She had apparently been given special access by the nursing staff. She was having conversations with Carol's medical team before I arrived. When I got there, decisions had already been discussed. Treatment options had already been framed, and I was being handed summaries of conversations I should have been part of. I asked Renee directly about the healthcare proxy. I asked her when she and Carol had made that decision. She did not blink. She told me they had discussed it after one of Carol's earlier cardiology scans when the doctor had suggested Carol make sure her wishes were documented. She said Carol had decided she wanted Renee to make medical decisions if Carol could not make them herself. She said it was Carol's choice and that she hoped I understood that. I asked why neither of them had told me. Renee said they had not wanted to worry me. She said it was a legal precaution and nothing more. She said she hoped I wasn't going to make this difficult when her mother was lying in a hospital bed. She used Carol's condition as a wall between me and my right to question what was happening. I had seen that move before. I had just never seen it turned on me by my own daughter. I called an attorney that evening from the parking garage. Not dramatically, not in a panic. I described the situation. I described the proxy document. I described the timeline. The attorney listened and then told me something important. He told me that a healthcare proxy addresses medical decisions. He told me that as Carol's husband, I still had rights. He told me to document everything carefully. He told me not to sign anything, not to agree to anything, and not to be pushed out of conversations without noting it. He also told me to check something else. He told me to check the financial documents. I had not thought about the financial documents. Not yet. I had been so focused on Carol's health that I had not stopped to consider that someone might be doing something on another front entirely. I went home that night for the first time in 9 days. I sat at the kitchen table where Carol and I had eaten 1,000 meals. I opened the filing cabinet in the hallway. I pulled out folders. I looked at accounts. I looked at property records. I looked at beneficiary designations. And I found something that made my hands go still on the table in a way that told me this situation was much larger than a healthcare proxy document. 6 months earlier, 2 of our joint financial accounts had been restructured. Carol's retirement account beneficiary had been quietly changed. A home equity line of credit had been opened against our house. I had not signed any of these documents. I looked more carefully. The signatures on several of them did not look right to me. One account change had happened on a Tuesday in October when I was out of town for 4 days on a job site. 4 days. Enough time for someone with access to the right information to move things quietly. I sat at that table for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the microwave blinked. Outside, a car passed slowly down our street. I thought about 31 years. I thought about every single time I had handed someone my trust and not asked for receipts. I thought about how I had always believed that the people you love are who they say they are. I thought about the fact that my wife was in a hospital bed, and someone who called herself my daughter had been in our financial life like a hand in a pocket. I took photographs of every document. I sent them to the attorney. I went back to the hospital at 6 in the morning and I sat beside Carol and I held her hand and I did not say a word about any of it, not because I was afraid, because Carol was fighting to breathe and she did not need that weight on her chest. There would be time for truth later. Right now she needed peace. So I gave her peace and I carried the rest of it alone. Day 11, I went to the coffee machine at the end of the hall, 2 minutes, maybe three. I needed to stretch my legs and I needed the warmth of something in my hands. When I came back, the security guard was standing at the door of Carol's room. He was young and he looked genuinely uncomfortable. He had the paper. He held it out to me. He said there was a legal document naming me as a person to be excluded from the patient's room per the request of the healthcare proxy holder. He said he was sorry. He said he had to ask me to leave the floor. I looked past him through the small window in the door. Renee was standing at Carol's bedside. She did not look at me through the window. She was speaking to a nurse. She was composed. She had planned this. She had waited until I stepped away for 2 minutes and she had handed over a document she had prepared before she ever walked through those hospital doors that morning. I looked at the guard, I took the paper, I read it quietly. I folded it and put it in my jacket pocket. I told the guard I understood and that I would not cause a problem. He exhaled like I had given him a gift. I nodded, I walked to the elevator, I pressed the button. I rode it down to the lobby. I walked out through the automatic doors into the cold air of a spring morning that felt nothing like spring. I called my attorney from the parking lot. He answered on the second ring. I told him what had just happened. He was quiet for a moment and then he said one sentence that reordered everything in my mind. He said, "Marcus, your wife has a right to say who is in her room. The question is whether anyone has been influencing what she believes and what she wants." He paused, then he said, "I think it's time to talk to Carol directly, alone, and I think we need to move quickly on the financial side." That night I did something I had never done before in my marriage. I called Carol's hospital room from my cell phone. It was after 10 o'clock. Renee had gone home. A night nurse answered. I told her my name. I told her I was Carol's husband. I told her I wanted to speak with my wife. She put me through. Carol picked up on the third ring. Her voice was tired but present. She said my name and something in my chest unfolded. I told her I missed her. I told her I had been there every day and that I was sorry I wasn't there right now. She asked me why I wasn't there. I paused. I asked her gently if she had signed any papers recently, papers about visitors. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said that Renee had brought her something to sign a few days ago. She said Renee had told her it was a standard hospital form to confirm next of kin for communication purposes. Carol's voice had a softness in it that told me she had not known what she was really signing. I kept my voice even. I did not want to frighten her. I told her I loved her. I told her I would see her soon. I told her to rest. After I hung up, I sat in my car in the driveway of our house and I looked at the steering wheel for a long time. Carol had not known. Carol had trusted her daughter and signed what she was told to sign. What had been done to both of us. That made it worse in some ways and clearer in others. My attorney moved quickly. By the following morning, he had filed a challenge to the exclusion order based on the circumstances under which it had been obtained. He also engaged a forensic document examiner to look at the financial paperwork I had photographed. By noon, he had contacted the hospital's patient advocate office directly. Within 6 hours, the exclusion order was suspended pending a review. I was allowed back in. I walked back into that hospital with my shoulders straight and my face calm. I took the elevator to Carol's floor. The nurse at the desk recognized me. She gave me a small nod. I walked to Carol's room and I pushed open the door and she looked at me from her bed and her face changed completely. She reached out her hand. I took it. I sat down in the chair that was mine. I did not say anything for a while. Neither did she. We just held on. Renee arrived 40 minutes later. She pushed open the door and stopped when she saw me. Her face did something complicated. She recovered quickly. She said she was surprised to see me there. She said she thought I had been asked to give Carol some space. I looked at her steadily. I did not raise my voice. I told her that Carol had asked me to be there. I told her the exclusion order had been suspended. I told her the hospital's patient advocate was now involved in Carol's case. Renee's face went through 3 expressions in about 4 seconds. She settled on cool composure. She said she had only done what she thought was best for her mother. She said I was too emotional to be in the room. She said she had documentation. I told her that I also had documentation. I told her that my attorney had been very interested in some of the financial documentation I had found. I watched the color change around her jaw, just slightly, just enough. She said she did not know what I was talking about. I told her that was fine. I told her she didn't need to know right now. I told her the right people were already looking at it. She stood in the doorway of her mother's hospital room and for the first time in a very long time she looked genuinely uncertain. She glanced at Carol. Carol was watching us both with tired eyes and an expression that had slowly been shifting over the last hour into something that looked like understanding. Renee left. She did not say goodbye. She pulled the door shut behind her and I heard her heels on the tile floor going away down the hall. Carol asked me quietly what was happening. I decided to tell her, not everything at once. Not in a way that would put her body under more stress than it was already carrying, but I told her enough. I told her about the financial accounts. I told her about the changed beneficiary. I told her about the home equity line. I watched her face while I told her these things. She did not look shocked. She looked like a woman who had suspected something small and just been told it was something much larger. She told me that over the past 2 years Renee had come to her several times with financial requests. She said Renee had told her the family needed to make adjustments, that things should be streamlined, that certain arrangements should be updated. Carol had trusted her daughter. Carol was a school teacher, not a financial planner. She had signed things that were explained to her as routine. She had not known what she was agreeing to in full. I held her hand while she told me this. I did not make her feel foolish. She was not foolish. She had been trusting. And the person she trusted had used that trust with great precision. There is a particular kind of hurt that comes from learning that someone who called you mom had looked at the life you built and decided to take from it quietly, piece by piece, while you lay sick in a hospital bed. The forensic document examiner came back with findings within 10 days. 3 signatures on financial documents were flagged as inconsistent with Carol's known signature samples. The examiner's report was careful and specific. My attorney filed a formal complaint with the relevant financial institutions. He also filed a report with the county district attorney's office. This was no longer just a family disagreement about hospital visitation. This was some. Anything else? Devin flew in. When he arrived at the hospital and I met him in the lobby, he hugged me in the way he used to when he was small, with his whole chest. He sat with his mother for a long time, then he came and sat with me in the family waiting area and I told him what I knew. He listened the way his mother does, with his full attention and his face very still. When I finished, he said one thing. He said, "Dad, whatever you need, I'm here." That was all. That was enough. The financial institutions froze the affected accounts pending investigation. The home equity line was flagged for review. Renee was contacted by 2 investigators who asked her to come in for an interview. She hired an attorney. The family attorney she hired was a man who specialized in estate disputes and had apparently been on a retainer arrangement with Renee for several months already. That detail, when my attorney found it, told us something important about the timeline. She had not acted impulsively. She had been planning this for long enough to have legal counsel in place. The first time Renee called me after all of this began, she did not apologize. She asked me to consider what I was doing to the family. She asked me if I understood that this would affect relationships that could never be repaired. She told me she had made mistakes, but that she had also done a great deal to manage things that I had been too distracted to manage myself. She said the word distracted like it was a compliment she was withdrawing. I listened to all of it. Then I told her that she was right about one thing: some relationships would not survive this, and that was not my doing. Hung up, I sat in the kitchen of our house for a few minutes. The house felt different now that I understood it had been something people had been calculating about. I looked at the table where Carol and I had eaten our meals. I looked at the cabinet where I kept our documents. I looked at the pictures on the wall of our family at different ages, different years, different versions of ourselves. I thought about how a picture can look whole from a distance and reveal cracks only when you get close. Carol came home from the hospital 3 weeks after the incident with the security guard. She came home to me. She came home to the house that was still in both our names, still properly ours, still standing the way we had built it. Devin was there when she arrived. He made soup. He sat at the table with us, and the 3 of us were quiet in the good way that families are quiet when they have been through something real and have made it to the other side. Renee did not come to welcome her mother home. She sent a text message to Carol's phone. It said she hoped she was feeling better and that she loved her. Carol read it. She set her phone down on the table very carefully, the way you set down something fragile that you are deciding whether to keep. The legal process moved at the pace legal processes always move, which is slower than pain. The financial investigation took months. There were depositions, there were document reviews, there were interviews. Through all of it, I kept going to work. I kept coming home to Carol. I kept cooking and paying bills and sitting beside her at appointments. I kept being the man I had always been because that was what I knew how to do, and because some things should not change just because someone tried to take them from you. What the investigation found was this. Over a period of approximately 22 months, Renee had made 6 unauthorized financial movements touching accounts and property that Carol and I shared. 3 of those movements involved what the examiner categorized as forgery of Carol's signature. The total financial impact was significant. Not catastrophic, but significant in the way that 22 months of quiet theft is always significant when you add it up. The district attorney's office filed charges, not because I pushed for it, because the evidence required it. When the charging documents were filed, my attorney called me and read me the counts one by one. I sat on the back step of our house while he read. The yard was full of afternoon light. The oak tree in the corner had come back in full after a hard winter, and it looked the way things look when they survive what should have stopped them. There was a family meeting that my attorney helped arrange, because by this point there were legal issues on the table that required everyone to understand what position they were in. Devin was there, Carol was there, I was there. Renee came with her attorney. She looked composed. She always looks composed. She sat across from me at the table, and I looked at her the way I have looked at her since she was a child. I tried to find the girl I raised in the woman across the table. She is still in there somewhere. I believe that, but the woman she had become had made choices that the girl I raised would not have recognized. Her attorney did most of the talking at first. He laid out what Renee was willing to acknowledge and what she was not. My attorney was direct and clear and did not raise his voice once. Carol spoke once during that meeting. She looked at Renee and said that what hurt her most was not the money. What hurt her was that Renee had believed she needed to take something that was never at risk of being withheld from her. Carol said she had always intended to be fair to both of her children. She said she had never made Renee feel otherwise, at least not intentionally. And she said she hoped Renee understood what had been lost that could not be recovered by any legal arrangement. Renee said nothing for a long moment. Then she said she was sorry. She said it quietly and she said it directly to Carol. She did not say it to me. I did not require her to. Carol nodded, that was all. The charges resulted in a plea agreement. Renee did not go to prison. The terms included restitution, probation, community service, and mandatory financial counseling. Her attorney negotiated carefully, and the outcome reflected both the seriousness of the conduct and the fact that the primary victim, Carol, had advocated for a resolution that allowed for the possibility of repair. I did not advocate against prison. I also did not advocate for it. I left that to the people who make those determinations. My job was not to decide her punishment. My job was to protect my wife and to make sure the truth was on the record where it belonged. There are things that people ask me afterward that I want to address honestly. People asked me why I had not seen this earlier. The answer is that I had trusted people I loved without demanding that they earn that trust in writing. That is not weakness. That is what loyalty looks like before it gets used. I do not think I was naive. I think I was focused on the right things, on Carol's health, on my work, on keeping our life together, and that focus had a cost. The lesson I carry is not that I should have trusted less. The lesson is that love and oversight are not opposites. You can be loyal and still pay attention. People asked me how I felt about Renee now. That is harder to answer. I feel many things. I feel the specific grief of a parent who sees a child become a person who can do harm to people who love her. I feel the clarity that comes from finally seeing a pattern you had been explaining away for years. I feel something that is not quite forgiveness yet, but is not hatred either. It is more like a door that I am leaving cracked. Whether anyone walks through it will not be up to me. People asked me about Carol. Carol is doing well. She is home. She is on a medication regimen that is managing her condition effectively. She walks every morning with me through the neighborhood, the same streets we have walked for 22 years. She holds my hand sometimes and sometimes she doesn't, and both feel right. She does not talk about Renee often. When she does, it is quietly and without bitterness, the way a person talks about something they are still deciding how to hold. Devin calls twice a week. He is a good son. He always was. He is one of those people who shows you what right looks like, not by lecturing about it, but by doing it consistently without announcement. I have told him more than once that he made this easier. He told me more than once that he learned how to show up by watching me. That hit me in a place I was not expecting. House is still ours. The accounts are being restored through the restitution agreement. The home equity line was closed. The beneficiary designations were corrected. The paperwork that had been arranged without my knowledge was unwound document by document until everything was back in the order it should have been in all along. My attorney sent me the final confirmation on a Thursday morning, and I read it at the kitchen table with my first cup of coffee, and then I closed the folder and sat for a minute. I thought about the security guard in the hallway. I thought about how apologetic he was when he handed me that paper. I thought about how he was just doing his job and how, in a strange way, that moment was the moment everything became visible. Before that paper, I might have continued to adjust. I might have continued to step back and give Renee the room she was quietly claiming. I might have continued to tell myself it was not as bad as it felt. But that paper made it real in a way that could not be explained away, and so I am almost grateful for it. Almost. What I know now that I did not know 31 years ago is this: the people who need you the most are not always the ones who value you the most. And the quietest form of disrespect is the kind that counts on you never looking closely enough to see it. I spent years being the dependable one, the one who handled things, the one who stayed, the one who asked the least and gave the most. I thought that was love, and in many ways it but it was also a posture that made me easy to overlook and easier to take from. That is not a posture I hold anymore. I still show up, I still stay, I still carry the things that need carrying. That is who I am, and it is not a flaw. But now I pay attention while I do it. I notice what is happening around me. I notice who says what and when and why. I notice the difference between someone who loves you and someone who needs access to what loving you provides. I notice these things not with suspicion, but with the simple clarity of a man who learned the hard way that trust is not the same as blindness. Carol told me something a few weeks after she came home. She told me that when she was in the hospital in those days when I was not allowed in, she kept asking about me. She told me the nurses would give her vague answers and that Renee would redirect the conversation every time Carol mentioned my name. She told me that lying in that bed without me, there felt wrong in a way she could not explain to anyone because she was still working out what she understood and what she didn't. She told me that when I called her that night at 10 o'clock and she heard my voice, something in her settled. She said it was like a room that had been tilted finally finding its level. That is the thing about 31 years. You become the level of someone's room. You become the standard by which they measure what is wrong and what is right. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. I am Marcus Reid. I am 58 years old. I am a husband and a father and a man who stayed in a chair beside a hospital bed for 11 days and then walked back in through those doors when they tried to close them on him. I am not a man who wins by being loud. I am not a man who wins by hurting people who hurt me. I am a man who wins by knowing what is true and being willing to stand in it even when it costs something. And I am still here. That matters more than anything else I could say. I want to ask you one thing before you go. You have just heard what it looks like when someone mistakes your patience for permission, when someone confuses your loyalty with weakness, when someone assumes that because you have always stayed you will never look closely enough to see what has been done in the dark. If any part of what Marcus carried felt familiar to you, I want you to leave a comment below and just say I see it. You do not have to explain, you do not have to share your whole story. Just say I see it. Because sometimes the most important thing a person needs is to know they are not the only one who has been handed a paper telling them they do not belong in the room they built.